So it's 6:30 PM. We'll call to order the Plan Commission meeting for April 23rd, 2024. I see all members are in attendance with President McCaig visiting us virtually. Has the meeting been properly posted?
Yes.
Okay. Why don't we start with agenda item number 2? Approval of February 27th, 2024 Plan Commission minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
So motion by Commissioner Wickland, seconded by Commissioner Kylie Miller. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. President McCaig?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item number 3, introduction of a request by zoning petition to amend the regulations pertaining to principal uses permitted in the MX districts as detailed in 535-25 of the Village of Shorewood zoning code. Bart, can you start us off with an overview, please?
Yes. President McCaig, hopefully you can see this correct. First time back on Zoom, making sure it's shared it correctly.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So what is before us tonight is an introduction of a request by zoning petition to amend the regulations pertaining to principal uses permitted in the MX districts as detailed in 535-25 of the Village of Shorewood zoning code. The applicant is here just for your reference when we get to questions and answers. This is just an overview of what the code looks like now. So within the commercial zoning update, we did adopt a very handy table. So with respect to the MX districts, MX1 and MX2, as you're familiar, the only differentiation there is the allowed height of MX1 versus MX2. All the uses are the same. Office uses is the use of question here. As you see in the current table, it's only allowed in the upper stories or the rear of the ground floor, the rear being defined as at least 20 feet behind the storefront windows. So the applicant owns property that is zoned MX and was seeking to an amendment that would allow an office use in at least a portion, if not all, of their space. Item overview, the request to rezone regulations pertaining to principal uses permitted in MX districts. Office uses is what we're here to discuss. With respect to the specifics of what all is included in office uses, mental health practitioners, just for your reference, that is not considered a clinic, even though within their application they referenced mental health clinic. Our code identifies that type of business as an office use. As I mentioned, they're currently only allowed behind 20 feet of allowed uses in the MX district. Allowed uses include retail sales, consumer services, eating and drinking establishments, and artisan production of small scale studio spaces. The commercial zoning update was performed in 2022 and adopted in 2023. One of the codified intents was to create active streets and civic spaces during the day and into the evening through a mix of uses. The way to do that was through implementation of a new zoning scheme. The MX zones were created to produce clusters of storefront activity. Quote, walkable storefront buildings generally include shopping, eating and drinking, and services behind storefront windows. So once again, that just reinforces what the intent of the code was. As you're familiar, we hired a national firm, Codemetrics, to help us design that code, which was ultimately adopted early last year. With respect to the space that the applicant owns, it is zoned MX1, as I mentioned. It was formerly occupied by Stoll Associates, who operated an office out of that space. At the time they did that, that was a permitted use. It was rezoned in February of last year, which would have become a non-conforming use. It has been vacant since 2022. Unfortunately for the applicant, non-conforming use is no longer able to be grandfathered into the former code because it's been more than 12 months. So that during the process, it was discussed that yes, we are creating several non-conforming uses, but those non-conforming uses could continue as long as they were operated and or reoccupied within 12 months of the former use. This one has termed beyond the 12 months. The property is a commercial condo. The owner has an office use, a mental health practitioner in mind, desiring to move into the space. The current code does not allow offices beyond the first 20 feet of that storefront. So in order to pursue this prospective tenant, the applicant has applied for a zoning amendment to change those specific requirements. Just for your reference, this is the building here, the Metropolitan Condos. So the Stoll Associates is the south commercial tenant. And then here, just an overview of the floor plan. Once again, Valis LLC, south commercial tenant. With respect to the actual floor plan, so this is the built environment of the space. As you can see, it is all developed as offices and cubes of, and various conference rooms, et cetera. The space in mind here, I've highlighted in yellow. This represents the first 20 feet of occupiable space. And so the code would allow office uses in the remainder of the space. We do allow lobbies into office uses. You know, you have to find a way to get there somehow. So this lobby area is not a problem. What we're really discussing here is whether or not this yellow space should be maintained with the current code to require a more active use, or whether or not all or a portion of that could be operated as an office while keeping the intent of the code that was developed last year. So once again, the requested amendment is to permit office uses in the MS district as long as they're not located in a street corner. I will admit that that second caveat or clause was discussed between the applicant and staff, because the zoning consultant we used last year did make it very clear to me when I reached out to her that if you are to do this, she would want to maintain street corners as active spaces, not allow an office use there. They are not on a street corner, and so they were willing to put that within their request to say, we're looking for office uses in the district, and they agree that they don't, they should not be located in a street corner. So that was after discussion with staff. Street corner, of course, would need to be clarified within the first 30 or 60 feet, for example, within the zoning code update. Our consultant referenced 30 feet of occupiable space as a standard storefront. So if you're looking at the first storefront, you're looking at 30 feet. If you're looking at two storefronts, 60 feet, et cetera. So all for discussion as we, discuss where we want to see this amendment go. As drafted, this would impact the entire MX district, minus a few places that are on corners, but there are MX buildings that are internal to the block that, would then outright allow office uses. As I mentioned, I did discuss this with the consultant, and staff and consultant had a modified suggestion to permit office uses in the MX district that occupy no more than 20% of a building's frontage and are not located within the first 30 or 60 feet from a street corner. This version of 20% frontage would essentially make smaller buildings have to conform to the current code, saying, because you can't have 20% of a 30 foot frontage. So this would impact the change. It would limit it to larger buildings. So we did hear requests from larger buildings saying that we've got a lot of space to cover, to fill, and we can't possibly get retail for all of that. So this would kind of respond to that comment that we heard within the process by saying, on larger buildings, we're okay with modifying it to allow office spaces. That 20% was based on using the floor plan previously. It could be a different percentage. The first 30 or 60 feet could be a different percentage. I guess what I'm going for here is there are options with respect to where the plan commission would like to see a recommendation. So my final bullet point here for discussion, this is an introduction item tonight. The questions that staff is looking to receive feedback on is, do we want to allow office uses in a storefront building? If so, at what scope of impact? Design specific this building or district wide? So, or this type of building, I should say, not just 4485, because once again, this does impact all of MX, but there are differentiations of buildings within there, whether they're small or large. So those are the two questions that I hope to receive at least initial thoughts on. And once again, this is just for introduction or discussion tonight. For your reference, this is the zoning map. I realize it kind of dilutes itself out, but the lavender areas are what we're referring to with MX. So this cluster of MX, mixed use activity with more walkable kind of retail types uses was identified around Kensington, but there are larger scope of blue that would be office building specific, including the large corner of the southeast of Oakland and Capitol. So within the process, we did identify places where we thought this type of zoning scheme would work with respect to the buildings and the location of clusters. So this is the map that we're working with. Once again, if you change anything with the MX, it will change all of the purple or lavender parcels. The review and approval process. So we are here tonight for the Plan Commission introduction, April 24th. Theoretically, the Plan Commission could make a recommendation May 28th. You may not be able to make one May 28th, but I would hope that we could at least, try to get there. That would allow for a June 3rd public hearing in front of the village board and village board consideration of any proposed update. So this is kind of where we're at. As I mentioned, my particular questions that I'd like to hear some feedback on are whether or not the Plan Commission is open to allowing office uses in the MX storefront district, and what is the scope of the impact that we would be comfortable with. I can reshare the screen at any point if we need to, but I'm going to stop for the purposes of discussion. As I mentioned, I should say, we did receive a lot of public feedback. Those are all included in your packet. I did receive one that I can read into the record at the appropriate time from someone that submitted after the deadline to publish the packet. So With that, I will end my presentation and turn it back to the chair to lead public comment and plan commission discussion. I see President McKeag has her hand raised.
Okay. President McKeag?
Oops.
I just wanted to note that the PowerPoint didn't advance on the Zoom screen, but I feel that I was able to follow the presentation and don't need the visual.
Okay. Very
Yeah.
good. Public comments? If you'd like.
thought-
You-
I'm sorry.
You don't have to, but you're
No,
certainly
we do
welcome
want-
to.
we do want- I just thought that you all just,
Oh, nope. So we'll do public comments and then we'll discuss as a commission. So if you could start with your name and your address.
my name is Phyllis Brostoff. I'm very short.
That's welcome to the club. So am I.
And my address is 3431 North Lake Drive, Milwaukee. The business address is 4485 North Oakland Avenue. And I also introduced, this is Andrew Stefanich, who grew up in Shorewood. His mother and father lived in Shorewood until just a couple years ago. And he would be speaking actually, but he has some difficulty speaking right now, so he's got to rest his voice. So, did you have another question for me?
No, ma'am.
Put it-
Feel free.
Okay, for me. Well, first of all, the first thing we'd like to do is really thank Bart. He alluded to the fact that he's been talking with us, and we really, really appreciate it very much. We got, we were not aware of the zoning change until we got this live tenant potential, in discussing a lease. And he's been extremely useful and helpful to us because, I'm a social worker, not a city planner. So there's just a lot of things around zoning that we didn't, I didn't know about. But Andrew is a professional commercial real estate agent. And he and two people from Colliers have been, one commercial and one office, have been working for 2 years trying to find us a tenant. So we have really been extremely diligent about it. I mean, it's costing us a lot of money, of course, to just maintain the space, but we have been working really, really hard. This is a market situation that is not what it was even a couple of years ago, even 4 years ago. We've got one offer for half of the space. And when we did the numbers, it just, for a retail use, it just was undoable. And just to remind everybody that the retail that was done in the northern part of the village, in our neighborhood, was done with TIF funding and financing, which really supported the availability of financing for it. I could find one bank willing to give us financing, one. So the things from that point of view are very different than they were with the development of the rest of the area. We're proactive, as an example, trying to find a hardware store, which used to be there years and years and years ago until it burned out. We could not get any interest in anything like that. And I just wanted to, I'm just reading my notes, make sure that I don't miss anything that I wanted to put on top of mind for you all. But, we'd really like to entertain any questions. I don't know if that's something that can be done in this setting.
Sure, that's not a problem.
And
If the commission has questions,
okay,
when you're done speaking.
I
we'll
think we made
ask.
the major points, and you all were given our request, and we tried to identify what we thought were the most salient features in our narrative.
Okay.
And if there may be something technical that I'm sure Andrew could speak for a couple of minutes if needed, but in here he's got a cough.
Okay. We'll start with Commissioner Kylie Miller and then Commissioner Flynn Post.
The potential lease company, Roots, is that their name?
Yes,
From our understanding, they're a mental health provider.
yes.
Do you know what kind of practice it is? Are they psychiatrists, psychologists, just mental health counselors?
Well, they are mental health counselors. They are, it's a clinic that works with people with addiction.
Okay.
alcoholism and other addictions. So that's their specialty.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Flynn Post.
My question is about the potential staff amendment.
Mm.
So I'm just wondering if the amendment that Director Griepentrag is proposing, if that satisfies the light concerns that had been shared in the information that we've been provided.
We would like to have all of the space for this office use. As I discussed with him, that, you know, you need all that light. No, my husband gave me a piece of candy. Shouldn't have had it. Right in my throat.
There's,
The,
there's water right in the hallway if you'd like.
okay, well, I'll,
We have
suffer
cake
through.
too.
There's cake, right, that's even better, right? You know, you need a lot of light. We were social workers and nurses in that space for 25 years. And, you know, this is work that requires not being in a dark space in multiple ways. So they really need all that frontage. And we had the, you know, that was part of why we bought that space, all those windows. So we want to use the whole space for office use for this use. Thank you. So you have,
Any additional questions?
It's not a question. I'd be happy to clarify with what we're talking about if you're open to it. So yes, I did meet with Phyllis and Andrew at the site. And so this space that we're talking about, initially, they were hoping or thinking that their prospective tenant would be fine with just this front kind of executive suite where it's one office and then I believe like a reception kind of space. And so at that time, I had drafted the code language with respect to carving this out as an allocation, but still requiring this one, which formerly had its own set of doors when the building was first developed, this to be retail. But in subsequent conversations with their prospective tenant and with themselves, they did not believe that my proposed amendment would satisfy their client. So I had drafted my language after our site visit where this was considered a possibility. So yes, I just wanted to clarify that they are seeking full space, but staff was still discussing whether or not there were ways to still meet parts of the intention of the code with carving anything out. But yes, otherwise the remainder of the space would be fine. This does provide some access to light if it did that, but not as much as they are currently seeking. So they have the right to request what they were asking for, just putting in the perspective of the zoning administrator.
and it's not a corner, which can't believe anyway, it's not a corner. And it's, we understand, and we don't want to blow up the code. You know, it's a very,
Yeah, go ahead. Take your time.
I don't want to prepare me.
Just make sure to say your name, address, introduce
Sure.
yourself.
Andrew Stefanich, 2050 North Commerce, number 202, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 532. So the tenant will not accept the space without the windows in the front. It's really the only facade where there are windows. There's some windows in the back, but it's really like where you get.
Have you discussed how long would their lease run? Is this a long-term lease that they're willing to sign? 5 years, 10, 7? Okay, thank you.
that's very significant.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from commissioners? President McCaig, anything? And then we'll move on to discussion.
Had a nut.
Nothing from me.
Okay. Okay, then we will close public comment. Go ahead.
Sorry, I did have the one additional comment that came in after the packet.
Oh, go ahead.
If I could just read it into the record. This is from Dan Ammerman and family, 4440 North Wilson Drive, apartment 1. I just wanted to voice my family's support for the rezoning of the property in question back to office use. I think the addition of some white collar employment into downtown corridor would help support the local businesses during lunch hours and during the winter months. Besides, we have a tremendous amount of retail options already available to us. Let's stop the revolving door of food establishments that do not have a large enough population to draw on here. Thank you.
You know, just to say that Go water. You know, they're going to have a pretty good population of patients coming in and leaving. And that's also supportive of the,
It's okay.
can't believe it. And the baby. Weak.
If we have questions, we'll come back to you. Well, don't worry about it. So we'll move on from the public comment. We'll go to discussion amongst committee members or commission members rather. Anyone want to,
I'll start.
Commissioner Kylie Miller?
In our table of use classifications, right above office is medical dental clinic dash office. And at the time that the working group was working on this, and then when it came before the Plan Commission, there was a lot of discussion about whether we should allow medical dental clinics, veterinarians in these, MX storefront spaces. And then was it January, February, we decided, well, let's revisit it in a year, see how things go. And I think this is the first opportunity we've had to think about that. And so we're not talking, I'm just wondering if we're accurately thinking about this as office space or whether we should think about this as a medical office that should be allowed any place in a MX storefront space. Certainly it's a different kind of exam going to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist than it is a chiropractor or your internist. But I think we all know more than ever how important mental health care is in our community as well. My husband and I have a niece who just retired in January at age 57 and as a child psychiatrist. And 25 years ago, she was counseling the survivors of the Columbine shooting. And over the years, she has told me it got very wearing to try and convince young people not to kill themselves or others. So I'm a firm believer that mental health care is important for everyone of every age. And I think we should welcome this potential tenant into the space, but, redo the part of our use classifications and reword it so that, medical or dental office or clinic includes psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health counselors, and veterinarians, comma in there. And make it more specific. And, with a 7-year lease, we're not thinking, in 3 years, maybe an insurance company is going to want to move in there or a real estate office. And since we were going to revisit this issue anyway, I think this is a great opportunity to do that.
Okay. Any other
I have a question.
Of course.
So if the building hadn't been vacant for more than 12 months, this would be a non-issue, right?
Correct.
So one of
Yep,
the
we could've-
options of code changes like that, 24 months and why
I would have to,
why did you
the
pick
village
12?
attorney's not here. I'm not sure if that language is referenced from state statute. I know it's a pretty standard length of time. If it's local, then yes, we could consider making it 24 months. Good suggestion. I would have to talk to the village attorney just to make
Yeah.
sure that we're not missing some other, case law or state statute that set that as the relevant time frame. I can definitely check on that for you though.
Yeah. And then I go back. So my other question is I keep going back to the intent of the code, which Barbara talked about. What is the intent of what we chose for use in those spaces? And there's a big difference between somebody that has appointments versus, 12 people come in, go to lunch, come back and leave, right? If you have 12 rooms, I didn't count exactly. So what is the intent of the code that we chose for MX? What I would just like to have somebody re-explain to me, right?
So I can read what the office use categories, and that may or may not answer your question, but
Yeah.
just for the sake of
For our
attempting, right? The office use category includes workplaces of private companies, organizations, for-profit and nonprofit, and public agencies providing professional, executive, management, medical, administrative, or design services, including the following subcategories: workplaces of firms, organizations, or agencies, as well as individuals in a co-working environment providing professional executive management, administrative, financial, accounting, consulting, and legal services, but excluding walk-in offices. Examples of business or professional offices include accounting, architecture, computer software, design, engineering, graphic design, interior design, investment, insurance, law offices, mental health practitioners, and counselors. So with respect to the request here, we're looking at mental health practitioners and counselors. If there was a desire or a different way of doing that, you could split those out from the other types if you think they don't meet the same intent of, say, an architecture firm, which is going to have less, walk-in customers. So if there is a desire to look at perhaps creating a different category, either including or as a subcategory of medical, that's also another way of looking at it. So yeah, I would encourage any plan commissioner to, perhaps think of common uses that they could split out to, not open up the code as widely as it would be if we just said these are all permitted.
Right, yeah. So again, another avenue to solve the challenge here.
I'd just like to make a comment that during the zoning update process, we did talk about this building extensively as a sort of a dead space and wanting to reactivate this corner. But I know within the context of the annual review, I think that there is a huge opportunity for us to reevaluate. And we did talk about whether there would be any potential barriers for lessees to come in or businesses to come in, and not wanting to have the code to be overly prescriptive to preventing businesses and then of moving into the village and then having, again, dead space because it's empty space. So I think this is a good time for us to reevaluate.
Commissioner Pollock, Commissioner Wickland.
Had some questions on corner approach makes any sense. Is there any reason why whether the building's near a corner?
So the corners are where most pedestrian activity takes place, whether you're walking around the corner from your parking space, et cetera. So the consultant, which once again, we hired last time, said that her primary concern was preserving the corner for the most active uses. They're very visible. They often have two storefronts, right? So they have the side windows and the front windows. And so having an office use close down both of those potentially with either blinds, things of that nature. As a reminder, to Commissioner Flynn Post's point, the Ascension Clinic that took over Sendix was often referenced as what people in the village didn't want to see. And so when they moved in there, they completely blocked out their windows, and it's kind of a dead space in terms of pedestrian activity. So the consultant said, yes, you kind of want to have visible storefronts on corners, which office uses are less likely to have.
I think our consultant was great to work with, and I agree with her philosophy of this, although we do have that storefront right across the street that has had paper over its window for a couple of years. Not sure how vibrant that is for the street. But when we have evidence that it's been a couple of years and it's not financially feasible to have in the kind of business we would prefer, then I think we have to think how practical it is and maybe reconsider our philosophy of those storefronts.
Commissioner Wickland.
So we have to reconsider it all, though?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
Like, we have to reconsider the code in general in order to make this happen?
Yes, the code would need to.
Because I mean, like, everyone seems to agree like this would be great, but in redoing it just because of the circumstances we're in now, that's the only reason to think about it, I guess.
Correct. If they were to apply for occupancy, I would deny it. I'm pretty comfortable saying that it's not allowed in the code. So the only way to allow the occupancy would be to change the code, either to outright permitted it or find other ways, as Commissioner Klein mentioned, to add additional time to the non-conforming use clause, or to look at making a new category for it or something. But yes, the code would need to be updated to allow their occupant to occupy the space as they would like.
But we could update it so it's allowed, but they would have to come to the plan commission again to get, if anyone else were to want to do it, they'd have to come to the plan commission to get approval.
I mean, if you made it a
Not that that's
conditional use,
ideal, but
if you made it a conditional use, that would require plan commission review, but just to remind you, a conditional use can't be denied. So like you'd have to identify why it's a conditional use. So off the top of my head, you could condition it upon, you know, the review of a floor plan, but then that's not really enforceable. So I'm always less of a fan of conditional uses unless you have specific things like hours of operation
Yeah.
or, you know, other operational controls. I'm not interested in seeing whether or not legalities can, you know, control the first 3 feet of frontage to have a window display, which I don't know the answer to. That was discussed or debated in the commercial zoning update as well. How far in zoning can go. I would much rather keep conditional uses to operational controls that are clear to address.
yeah, because I'm all for this, by the way, and you can clearly see you got a lot of letters of support, which is the most I've seen in any of our stuff. But at the same time, you know, do we want to be making changes to the code based on the current economy and things like that? Because then we look back and say, well, that was stupid because just for the time being, that's what we wanted or what somebody needed. Again, I'm all for it. I'm just trying to think this
Yeah.
through.
Are you done?
Yeah, yeah.
I keep going back to active. What does active mean? Right? We talk about all these list of things, but if you have appointments, people coming and going, it's active, right?
I
Well,
agree with that.
It's not
I mean, I
for
don't dis-
everybody.
yeah, I don't disagree. I think it sounds as though it falls closer to the description of the Ascension office where there are folks coming and going. You know,
with
is
the
it
front walled
active?
up?
Yeah, I mean, it does, I think it's less, is there activity and more, can you see into the store? Can you see what's going on? Is it engaging from the street?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we would probably all agree that Ascension doesn't fit as engaging from the street. So that is where I think that the definition of active was intended.
And the other thing is weekends too. So people discussed the daycare use that occupied former Goldie's, right? People thought it was a dead space on the weekends when they wanted more things to walk to and shop to. So active was also referenced in terms of when will be people occupying a space. Is it during the day? Is it at night? Is it on weekends? Is it all the above? And so that was taken into consideration when these clusters were created, thinking like, this is where people would want to park, walk to do other things. We'll have spaces of office and spaces of other non-active uses, but the consultant did map this as an active use. So whether or not the entire frontage realistically can be active, I think is the question that I'm struggling with here, and how we can preserve that level of activity with respect to, yes, people coming throughout the day that is active, but is that active enough? So
Yeah, I
that's the
think,
question.
you know, to her hardware store example, that would be fantastic, right? There's a lot of things we want here, but maybe we have to realize that we're just not getting.
Commissioner
I
Flynn
just
Post.
wanted to make a comment too, that it could be argued that if the use is legal non-conforming and was not less or least within that time frame, within the 12 months, then you could argue that it's not. So, you know, on kind of a philosophical basis. So it's getting a little bit more into how would we approach reevaluating something within the code? It's complicated, right? It's like trying to establish an objective criteria for what active means, what you want that space to look like. And I don't think we have a magic wand to say we want this building to have a hardware store, for example, or whatever other type of business.
I mean, the concern I would have there would be us trying to determine what is an appropriate market, right? Especially with all the mixed uses that we have, all the mixed use units that we have in the village, going in every time and saying, well, you're asking for too much rent, or so on and so forth, right? Like that, doing that every time would be a major concern of mine, and something I don't think we should step into, but we have hands popping up those are everywhere. So we'll go Wickland, Klein.
Yeah, I just think to that point though, I think that it is you know, and he does commercial real estate, but it's a terrible time for leasing commercial real estate right now. And so I just don't want us to react to the market either, that it is a terrible time and say, hey, we should change this because which again, I think this is probably a great use for this space, but at the same time, it's changing everything. That's what I'm most concerned.
Commissioner Klein.
Yeah, what is our vacancy rate? You know, I'm just trying to do that math, short-term, long-term.
Yeah, that's a figure that we don't have. I could ask the bid, and they were provided the packet for comments. I don't know when their next meeting is, but you know, anecdotally, when you go up and down the corridor, there are spaces that have been vacant. Barbara mentions the former Kensington Liquor has been vacant for a long time. The space next to Crave has been vacant for a long time. Both those are controlled by the same property owner. Doesn't seem to have any interest in, you know,
Well-
reaching out to people. But so yeah, there are some longer term vacancies, but in general, I don't see a lot of,
And especially office, I'd be interested, because I hear you can't get an office in Shorewood, and it would be great to have more office space in Shorewood. But that's just me walking down the sidewalk, you know, talking to people.
Sure. I mean, you know, it's a balance, right? I mean, the intent is clearly outlined in page 4 of, you know, mixed use corridors where walkable storefront buildings generally include shopping, eating and drinking and services behind the storefront windows and a mix of uses throughout the building, including residential. I mean, this is sort of the first kick at the can we've had at this
Mhm.
since this passed. It has not been, it's not been a long period of time for us as a community. It, I'm sure, feels like a very long period of time for folks who are trying to lease the space. You know, I share Commissioner Wickland's concerns that, you know, we are reacting to the market as opposed to reacting to bad policy that we established over
Mhm.
a year and a half of discussing this. That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I feel for them on this because I get it. I mean, like,
Mhm.
it makes perfect sense. I would want to lease that out, but again, I wish we could just say yes to that.
But regardless of the market, what small retail operation of any kind could afford that kind of renovation to make an office space work for them? And
I don't know, but I don't know that that's
yeah,
our
so I have two questions for Bart.
responsibility to.
Now, we do have existing medical and dental offices and other medical offices in the village. Do any of them have like Saturday hours, you know, where there are people, where it's not really dead on a Saturday, where people are coming and going? If we're talking about, you know, it's only a Monday through Friday kind of thing.
I can imagine some dentists might. I'm not familiar with other medical offices having that.
Yeah.
I know that the one that occupied the final space in the Mosaic Building, Hive, I believe they're only open on Tuesdays. And so they provide a specialized service that is, I don't know if she travels or what she does, but I'm sure there's probably options where some of them are open. In terms of zoning, that's not something that I'm going to be, you know, enforcing, making sure they're open on Saturdays, et cetera. So the idea of those other types of uses, they're going to want to be open on weekends because that's when they're going to make the most money. That's probably the concept behind that. But it's not to say that an office use couldn't be open. We don't prohibit it.
Yeah. I just think that residents of Shorewood and our surrounding area, we need more for our day-to-day lives and places to shop, eat, and drink. You know, we need the dry cleaners, we need the pharmacy. And so, you know, having these kind of health clinics, whatever kind they might be, you know, is an important addition that we need to have.
I mean,
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. But over the time frame that this was discussed and passed by numerous bodies,
Yeah. And we
the
said,
majority disagreed.
I know, but as far as medical things, and veterinarians, we were going to revisit that in a year. And so we did have a new vet move in within that,
Mhm.
was it 12 months on Wilson Drive? So that was, you know, okay, they got through, and this one just took a little bit longer. So
I'm going to check in with President McKeag. President McKeag, do you have any discussion or comments or questions?
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of this part of the code when we passed it last year, and so this kind of supports my reservations when we were talking about it last year. So I would be in support of modifying the code. I would also be in support of modifying the uses that, you know, what Commissioner Kylie Miller said.
Okay.
I have another
Commissioner Klein.
question. For that particular building, we coded as MX1. But if you look at how it's used today, it's really an office. It just has
Well,
glass
there's
front.
residential above it. That's what makes it the mixed
Office
use
on the
different.
first floor and residential front. Some of the ones that we say general office, because it's all the way up.
So general office allows for exclusive office or exclusive residential. The mixed use element of this building was that it was acknowledged that yes, the upper stories are residential, the lower stories commercial. So if it had been fully commercial or fully residential, the consultant might have had a different opinion about it. But based on how it was developed, she was pretty confident that this fit the scheme that she was, intending. Yeah, and I will be, they did originally approach me about just having it rezoned GX to allow full office, but that's, in my mind, that's even, I mean, it limits the impact to that particular parcel, but it makes the least sense in terms of it being a mixed use building that we identified as wanting to have active storefront ground floor uses. So another option though, perhaps, if a code amendment can't be identified and if that's something that someone else can help me, rationalize, that is what they originally did. That's what they originally did approach me with. But it was my opinion that the building itself is definitely a storefront mixed use building.
Yeah, because the whole first floor is this. At least in looking on the
There-
map.
It's
There's a
two
doctor's
different,
office
two
and-
tenants.
and
Yeah.
that they have
No, I mean,
two
like,
spaces.
it's similar
Use-wise.
use, right? I
Similar
mean,
use.
so like, all we did was kind of screw things up for them. Not you, us.
Well, I mean, you have to, we decided to update the code as a village.
Right.
and This is what happened.
No, I get why it happened.
That's an
there-
option to change just that building to GX1.
And there
not
was a
therefore-
year,
I'm sorry.
oh, I'm sorry.
And then not redo the entire
So-
commercial
So that,
district.
my question there would be, you change the code for that building to GX1,
Yep. Then it's.
and what do you do to the next mixed use
You.
building owner that comes before you? What do you say? That, in that scenario, then I think we're picking winners and losers.
Well, we're also responding to an opportunity to rent,
I
right?
mean, they're all, I'm sure.
I agree though, completely.
Yeah. Commissioner Flynn
Well,
Post.
I just wanted to make the point about the year gap. So, and also I'm curious to know about the notices that were provided. So reading the materials, it sounds like the property owner did not have an understanding that the zoning code was updated. So I'm just curious to know what steps are we taking to inform property owners and commercial brokers of the changes that we made. I feel like as being a part of it, I feel like we spoke about it endlessly, but, were there additional steps that should have been taken to notify them? And then also, what is the response from other business owners? So kind of the bigger picture of, what sort of feedback we're getting from this whole new update that was made.
So yeah, unfortunately, they had subletted it to a tenant who had their mail forwarded. So we did provide notice to all property owners at least twice in the process. And so I believe that maybe even 3 times with a postcard to begin with. But the 2 big meetings where we said this is the recommendation, this is the approval process, the letters were sent to that property on the address that the village has as the primary address, but the subleaser had their mail forwarded to a private address and never provided the general mail back to the property owner. That's my understanding. So the village we did notify property owners. It was unfortunate that the mail was being forwarded to not the property owner, but so yes, we did do our best to make sure that we, provided that notice. To your point, we had meetings all year long. Obviously, if you're not in the village, paying attention to stuff, you might not catch it, but we did on this part, unfortunately have perhaps a missed opportunity with respect to having their input within the process, but it's not because we didn't try is what I would suggest. I had not heard back from any other property owner since the rezone. At the time when we did send those notifications out, we did have people come into those meetings. I remember specifically the auto dealer on Capitol and is it Woodburn, somewhere in there. He came with specific questions because we also made him a non-conforming use and he was, discussed. But so we did have property owners receive those notices and come to the meetings. And so there was, we know that that did happen. Unfortunately, in this case, it just, it was forwarded elsewhere.
President McKay?
Do we have, does the village board have the power to give an exception to the non-conforming use?
The code specifically says that the village does not grant use variances. So I don't think the village board would have been the body. It would have been Board of Appeals, for a variance. Yeah, I don't believe so. But if you want me to research that question more fully, if I didn't answer, I'd be happy to look into it with the village attorney. But nothing in the process that I understand, takes uses to the village board.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion from commissioners?
Is there any other evidence of harm other than this petitioner? Is the bid weighed in?
The bid is not, like I said, I know they've been made aware. I saw Janet last week. I'm not sure the next meeting is if they're comfortable providing a position.
Okay.
I know that she specifically said that she can't speak on behalf of them without it being discussed. So I can reach out to her to see when their next meeting is, and I'd be happy to go there and see if their property owners have similar issues or concerns. But as of the moment, we don't have anything with response from them.
Commissioner Kylie Miller?
I appreciated all that feedback that we did get from various residents, especially, and it did not surprise me that the owners of the residential condominiums above this space were all in favor of it. Because I mean, this is like an ideal neighbor. They're quiet. There's no food smells, no loud bar patrons after 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night. So I can understand. And it's not like that it was a retail space and now we're going to switch it and want it to be office space. This has been medical office space in both spaces on that ground floor, I think, since the building went up.
Okay.
So,
Commissioner Pollock, Wickman, Line. Okay.
Well, what's the next step? I mean, we've talked about some things.
So yeah, the application is their request. So the next meeting, their request will still be the primary question. I've heard a lot of other options here though, so I will also provide, various different options that if their request is not recommended, that then goes to other things. I do believe that the Plan Commission is required to provide a recommendation before it goes to the village board. So to the applicant's hope, they would hope that at the next meeting, there'd be a recommendation. But once again, your recommendation, the village board has their own vote on it. So it would be my hope that we as a body could once again discuss the options, starting with what they specifically want. If that doesn't work, then working our way down how other ways might happen. But yes, the goal would be a recommendation at the next meeting so that the village board could take it up as the acting body.
I have just one quick question. And this is not just pertaining to this situation, but how are we as a plan commission supposed to sort of accept the premise that a lease amount is appropriate or square footage is appropriate? How do we determine that if someone is coming before us for a variation, right? Like in this situation, with all due respect, I'm not a commercial realtor, so I don't know, but how are we to determine that what's being asked for rent is appropriate, or that the space is a good space? I mean, I don't know. There are so many variables that exist, and we seem to have accepted the premise that it's a good space, it's a good rent, it's a good deal, it's a good, it's a good company that would move in. Those are a lot of variables that we've sort of accepted here. And I'm just wondering, either now or moving forward, if there are additional, variances that have been asked for, how do we as a plan commission determine figure out those questions, the answers to those questions?
So if I could provide a scenario just to understand your question better, are you suggesting that, or not suggesting, but
I'm suggesting nothing.
right? And not respective to this particular case, but
Right.
it came up in historic preservation as well, discussions about, is the applicant asking too much rent and therefore no one's applying for it, or are they asking market rates and it's just not feasible? So with respect to historic preservation, a different community like, requires that you put it up for sale. The person puts it up for sale for 3 times the market rate and you go, well, what is this about? And you go, well, we can't control what they're trying to sell it for, right? But it satisfies the time frame that then, allows them to tear it down.
Mhm.
Totally different scenario, but with respect to, is it a realistic amount? I would suggest that's for us to use our best judgment on. I'd be happy to reach out to other commercial real estate people that, aren't specifically tied to this particular, application to see whether or not they have issues with renting out retail to commercial spaces in the North Shore and Shorewood or wherever it is, but I don't have a source that I can go to that says this is what they should be asking for. This is what it goes for.
Right. And going back to one, this is just me speaking. One, I think that's a terrible use of your time. I mean, it's just, there are so many mixed use buildings in the village to have to go through that on each one. So it's sort of do you do it now for everything, or do you set yourself up for having to do this every single time? Because I mean,
I have a question.
sure, but I mean,
I'm just playing with
Go ahead.
the challenge that we have. Challenge that we have is we have an office. And we can no longer have it as an office. This isn't about who's renting it. It isn't about market rates for rent. It's that it's an office. And it no longer can be an office in our code. And so the cost for someone else to rent it is tear it down, rebuild, right? And that becomes to what was mentioned earlier. Sorry, I'm completely blanking on names. Are we putting an artificial barrier in front of opportunity? Because it's built out as an office.
sure. I mean, there are sides. I mean, there's no,
'Cause-
my concern is that we are going to end up piecemealing this entire thing out
To try to make it work.
to
right?
try to make it work
But
for a
go back
bunch
to
of,
what the problem is, right? The problem isn't about who's moving in.
who's moving in, I think, I don't
Yeah,
know, is
it's
germane
about the
to,
use of a space that's already built out as X, and now we want it to be Y. Right?
well, I mean,
And so we had a year clause, so for anyone to move into there on our new code, it
Mhm.
becomes cost prohibitive. So how do we remove the barrier of
Potentially.
cost prohibitive?
I mean, that's herein lies the problem, right? Like, we don't know and again, this is not just you, but for any mixed use, we don't know what they asked for rent for the first year. We don't know if they've since lowered the rent since we've gotten past the 12 months. And it's not just this use, it would be any mixed use unit, right? We would have to look into every single, and I don't think the problem is that we have an empty storefront. The problem is not necessarily a problem. We've determined as a village that we want activated mixed use and that this doesn't fall within that category. Now, for me, what the use is, right? I mean, if it was a doctor, a vet, mental health, that's not really germane to the real problem, which is we're going for mixed use here. We've determined that this isn't mixed use. So either we change the definition of mixed use as a village, which we certainly can do, but to piecemeal this out is a real concern of mine because it puts a lot of pressure on staff and on plan commissioners to go back and get a bunch of evidence and information
Every time.
every single time.
Back
So,
intensive inquiry forever.
right. And then, which leads to more confusion for commercial real estate agents and for brokers and for owners. Like, you could win, you could not win. It kind of depends on the makeup of the board. All of that is what we tried to get away from in doing this. And this seems like the first opportunity for us to take a look at it. So we either change it or we don't change it. Why, doesn't really fall in there for me.
You said before, if we did this piecemeal, picking winners and losers too, but we kind of accidentally, and for good reason maybe, but we made them a loser in this, right? Because it was office basically. And they didn't know about the 12-month thing. We could take that on face value. And so all of a sudden they lose because that space, I mean, looking at it, it can't be a restaurant, right? You need to put in hoods. I mean, it's cost prohibitive.
Mhm.
Is it going to be retail? You look at that area, again, like for someone to come in there, we know what retail's like in Shorewood. It's a tough business to begin with, but to pay rents to even cover the taxes on that place. And again, we're just getting the economics there, I know, but we made them a loser already. So that's what I just, in my head, I'd like to fix that because we made somebody a loser in this. But I don't know if it's, again, the intent of what we did was for a reason.
Right.
But making someone, screwing someone over in the process kind of sucks. Some of us can be okay with that, though.
I'm not, that's not,
I'm just kidding.
Well, that's why I suggested that this potential tenant really belongs in the medical office instead of just generic office. And we want to have medical offices. I'm sorry, we do. We need them. And I totally believe and understand that it's going to cost $200,000 to, make that space into what it could be for somebody else to use it. I mean, I had to move offices 3 times and had a budget of $300,000 for furniture and leasehold improvements. But that was for a much larger broadcasting company. That wasn't for a little
Mhm.
tiny operation like this. So we're making, there's like a no-win situation for the owners of that space. And so I think we want them, we want the village to win. We want this to be a win for them, for the tenant.
I mean, I don't disagree with you. but
Yeah.
Then we have to make a decision to change the language of the code. So either we move forward and do that, which I'm not at all opposed to, but I mean, it seemed on its face, this is pretty black and white.
I love editing languages, so I'm happy.
I'm well aware. Any other discussion? President McKay, anything?
No, I just want to know if Bart has enough direction.
I do. I probably have, 4 or 5 options to bring back to you next time. Once again, we'll start with the requests at hand and then work our way down through there is my expectation of how that works. But yes, I expect that there be a healthy discussion on this one. To everyone's point, it's tricky, but that's what zoning is and does sometimes. So I'm good to move forward for the next meeting.
Okay, any other further discussion from any of the commissioners? Okay, future agenda items, is there I mean, we have
had
this
one
coming
item
up in May.
between, what's that?
We have this coming back in May.
This will come back in May, but we do have a number 4 discussion of
Oh, I
2023
apo- I
Plan Commission
apologize.
annual report and future initiatives. And if this can be as quick as we need to go. I've already submitted this to the village board. As I mentioned back in January, the deadline was to submit them to the board. We've had some, thank you very much. We've had some timeline issues with respect to getting, everyone's finished. So we did have an opportunity to just, discuss this tonight. So I will bring this up very briefly, but, and President McKeg, can you see the screen now or not? I'm on Zoom here. I don't,
Are you sharing your screen on Zoom?
it says you are screen sharing on my end, but I don't know if she can see these.
I can see the screen. I don't know if the slides will advance, but you can proceed.
They've advanced. So for the benefit of those in the room, we have them on the slide and you have them in the packet if you'd like. So our annual report, it's pretty cut and dry. This is what we did. We convened 6 meetings. We provided recommendations for a comprehensive plan amendment and the commercial zoning update, both of which were adopted by the board in February. We did consider 7 conditional use applications, 2 outdoor dining, 1 drive-through lane, 1 resale business, event space, chimney height, and satellite dish. We also did consider 2 use classifications and 1 parking special exception. We held a joint meeting with the CDA regarding the future of the village's public works facility and affordable housing, and we reviewed revocation standards for conditional use permits. So this is all based on what was agendized last year. It's pretty straightforward. I don't think there's much to discuss here. The bigger question, future initiatives. This is always a hot topic for many committees with respect to what people want to accomplish in the scope of what resources we have, whether that's staff or money or otherwise. So the Plan Commission's future initiatives were submitted as this, but once again, that hasn't fully been sent through yet. So if there is something to discuss here, I'm happy to hear it. But We did have next on our to-do list to review and update home occupation regulations to increase housing opportunities in the zoning code through accessory dwelling units. Once again, to think about it, and I'm not saying that we have to do it. And then lastly, last year within discussion, it was requested that staff review and update notice requirements with particular attention to trying to outreach tenants in addition to just property owners. So these are the three that are currently on the initiative submission that I will hit the button on send whenever Village Manager Ewald asks me to. But if there are others, or if there's a different order that you'd like to, list these on, I don't know that it makes a difference, but I'm here to just to make sure that we're comfortable with this submission.
Any discussion regarding the future initiatives?
I have a question about number one, is that pertaining to in-home businesses, or could you clarify what?
Correct. So this came up during COVID, obviously, when a lot of people moved to working at home. And I know Barbara's always commented with respect to the late hours. You can't work certain hours for certain businesses. None of it kind of makes sense anymore. Shouldn't say none of it. Some of it doesn't make sense anymore. So just knowing that we're living in a different world with remote work, to revisit what those standards might be, maybe open it up to other opportunities or restrict other things that maybe are detrimental to the neighborhood since this has occurred. So we already have a code section on this. It was probably drafted and written, 10, 20, 30 years ago. Does it make sense in 2024 to have those regulations? So that was the intent of that.
Yeah, of course.
Another item just about the affordable housing initiative. Is that something that we need to capture here?
That
at
is
this
well in
time?
motion. Yep. I do expect that Village Manager Ewald will be polling yourselves, the CDA and Village Board, for a joint meeting again, likely in June. We'll see where all things line up, but yep, that is definitely on specifically her work plan, and I'm helping her on that. So that does not need to be identified in my world, because the board is definitely active on trying to find ways to use that money that they reserved.
Any other, Kylie Miller?
Yeah, Bart, considering your other workload, is number 3, the notice requirements, is that of these listed, maybe the one that would require less work from you and really just more of a discussion here to change policy on who gets noticed of what? And
It's less work if there's full agreement. I mean, from our end, we can set up our GIS system to, run whatever labels we need to run. So right now we run it based on property owner. We don't know the names of tenants, obviously. So in talking with our GIS consultant, we would just, insert tenant or current resident on that. The challenge with that is with apartment and multifamily uses, we don't have the number of units in every building. So we would also need to review all of the multi-unit buildings in the village to make sure that in GIS, we say apartment 1, apartment 11, apartment 20, whatever. So the code change, if there's agreement on it, wouldn't be much. Administratively, we would need to update our GIS requirement or our GIS data to have those units in there. And once again, then we just click a button and go on it. So I'm not saying it's anything that we can do, overnight, but it really is kind of a technical thing that we're just, if that's what the village wants us to do. I will say, and Crystal can speak to this, we do send a lot of notices.
Distance has increased. Even just, you don't think it, but even just 200. Has changed, it's a lot more for every notice.
yeah.
So it would increase postage costs. There are other things that would need to be understood, but once again, if this is something that the plan commissioner board want us to do, it's just a technical thing on our end to clean up.
Small multifamily buildings that I think would probably pose a bigger, getting the unit numbers on them. Just had one in today for a permit. It's a multifamily unit, but you don't know how many are in it. It's just a big building. But those buildings, I think, would be harder to narrow down all the units. Those smaller buildings, that's opposed to big buildings we have around.
Like, what about all those mailings we all get that just say occupant?
Those are through a mailing house.
Oh, okay. So that's like
extra
a
for
whole
that.
different.
Yeah, so we
operation.
acknowledge internally that we don't have all of these addresses. We have where we send the property tax bill to. And so that's, the primary thing that we maintain. But so in multifamily buildings, if there's 60 units and they're, we don't have those numbers. It's something that we would have to manually figure out.
I was just thinking that maybe this was something that we could easily, knock off the list this year.
Are these in priority order based on what you think we should?
These were in priority. The third one has been added, so I that have not received discussion on that, but the first two were prioritized in previous iterations of this. So I would defer to you if you want to do one versus the other, but this is the order that they were prioritized in, I think, for the last 2 years, was to tackle home occupations first. That might have been more because of COVID was more in front of people's minds, and it changed things. But I will say I get a request for an accessory dwelling unit probably once a month or once every 2 months. So that probably is more requested than home occupations. Like we get, rarely do we get calls on home occupations.
I was joking about making it working. Like, really?
Any other, before we get in trouble, any other future initiatives?
Oh, President McKegg's hand is raised. Sorry.
President
You
McKegg, sorry, I can't see
that.
your hand
Yep,
raised.
correct. You can't see that.
It seems like there's been a lot of talk about the residential code in terms of AD accessory dwelling units. So that's not on this list, right?
It is.
It is, it's number 2.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, my bad.
Okay. Anything else? From President McKegg, sorry.
No, that's all. Thanks.
Okay.
Can we reprioritize then? I'm sorry.
I don't think anyone else had their hand raised. Commissioner Pollock.
Can we make number 2 number 1? We reprioritize?
He doesn't.
I think you can make it whatever you would like.
We're not gonna work on them, so do we prioritize when we're going to do some work?
Does
I think it-
does
I think it does-
prioritizing 2 to 1 change?
In my mind, it does, because
Okay.
that gives me direction of which you would like to work on first. If I have ever asked, to provide that feedback, I think having these in order does make sense to me.
Okay.
For the time being, leave people working at home alone.
Well, I think that home occupation is more about, can you have people visit you, if you're like a counselor working out of your house. It's not just working at your home, it's running a business out of your home.
Correct. There
And-
had been questions
and-
in the past about group therapy or music lessons, where right now the code is you can only have one-on-one meetings. You can't have large scale
Yeah.
meetings. So there are things in the code that you definitely might want to look at again. So once again, back in 2020, when that first came on, I think it was more of a priority in terms of everyone's doing this now. And I'm just saying in the last years, it hasn't been a problem in our office. We haven't got a lot of questions on it. We haven't enforced or gotten complaints on it. Whereas for what it's worth, accessory dwelling units does oftentimes come up as not only attached to affordable housing opportunities, but also just like what people want to pursue. So
Mm.
if you're asking for my opinion, that one, I think, does meet more of what I'm hearing requests for than home occupations.
So flipping 2 and 1.
All
I
in
see
favor?
that. I see ADUs being like front yard porches. It's going to take about 6 meetings to.
Well, at least it won't be
Something like that.
chickens.
It will likely be very technical, correct? I mean, we have plenty of models to work from, but everyone's context is different.
And lot sizes vary and all that.
Is there a motion to,
We need a
Oh,
motion?
What about
I'll
future agenda
make a
items?
motion
I'd
to-
rather do it that way than,
I have asked my other committees to formalize the submission with a motion and a vote. So if you want to
Oh,
do
sure
so,
would be happy to entertain a motion.
Like to motion to change the priority, so we start with accessory dwelling unit,
Occupancy and then
occupancy, and then
notification.
Second,
We have a motion with a second. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion. All in favor of motions put forth by Commissioner Pollock, say aye.
sure, why not?
Aye.
I,
Opposed?
Hi.
Passes unanimously.
thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else on item number 4 before I move to future agenda items?
Nope.
Okay. Future agenda items, Commissioner Kylie Miller,
Since it appears that cake is in our near future,
very near.
I want to take this opportunity to tell Trustee Kudo how much I've enjoyed serving with you on the Plan Commission the last 8 years. maybe not as much as Dan, but thank you for all your input and your votes and
Opinions.
voting with me more often than not.
It's been a fun 8 years. It's time for Trustee Lynn, who will do a wonderful job on this.
You know, I
commission.
hate change, but this, I understand.
Trustee Lynn will do a wonderful job on this commission.
I'm not going to thank you, but I'd like to point out that Barbara and I agreed on everything today. This might be a first, so I just wanted to highlight that as you're leaving, we did that for you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Any real,
I have to say thank you, trustee Kudo, for
Oh.
your service. I do appreciate it.
thanks.
Vomit.
Any future agenda items?
You're so wonderful.
Yeah. Chair entertains a motion for adjournment.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second. First or motion by Wickland, seconded by Pollock. All in favor? Any discussion? All in favor? For
Aye.
Kate?
Aye.
Aye.
Bye.
I.
Right. We stand adjourned at 7:41. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Isn't this in your house? Why is it in the closet?